America. Land of opportunity, right? The place where dreams come true, where anyone can rise from rags to riches with a bit of hard work and determination. That's the story we've been told for generations. Home of the free, land of the brave, blah blah blah. We celebrate our freedom with fireworks and parades, waving flags and singing anthems. But beneath the surface, there's a different story unfolding. We tell ourselves this fairy tale. But what about the people who actually build this country? The ones who lay the bricks, assemble the products, and keep the wheels of industry turning? What about the people who work tirelessly, day in and day out, to keep our society functioning? The ones who break their backs, risk their health, and put food on our tables? The farm workers who toil under the scorching sun? The warehouse workers who lift heavy loads? The factory workers who endure repetitive tasks? What happens when they get hurt on the job? When an accident occurs and their bodies can no longer bear the strain? The answer, folks, is a goddamn tragedy. It's a story of neglect, of a system that fails the very people it was designed to protect. See, America's workers' compensation system is a patchwork of state-based programs. Each state has its own rules, its own regulations, its own way of doing things. Sounds decentralized. Maybe even kind of charming, right? Wrong. It's a bureaucratic nightmare that leaves injured workers drowning in medical bills, struggling to make ends meet, and abandoned by the very people who claim to fight for them. It's a system that forces workers to navigate a maze of paperwork, to fight for every penny of compensation, to prove over and over again that their injuries are real and deserving of support. Employers are supposed to cover workplace injuries. That's the deal, right? Except, surprise, they only cover a measly 21% of the costs. That's like ordering a pizza, eating the whole thing, and then tossing a $5 bill at the delivery guy. It's an insult, a slap in the face to the people who keep our economy running. And guess who gets stuck with the rest of the bill? Taxpayers, that's who. The hardworking citizens who pay their taxes, who trust that their money is being used to support the common good, and the injured workers themselves, the ones who are already suffering, who are already struggling to make ends meet, who now have to bear the additional burden of medical bills and lost wages. It's a rigged system, folks. A system that prioritizes corporate profits over human well-being. A system that allows companies to shirk their responsibilities, to pass the buck to the very people they should be protecting. It's a system that needs to change. It's a system that needs to be called out, to be exposed for the injustice that it is. A system that prioritizes corporate profits over human well-being. And it's about damn time someone called it out. It's time for a reckoning, for a movement that demands justice for the American worker. It's time for us to stand up, to speak out, to demand a system that truly supports and protects the people who make this country great, because without them, there is no America. And that's a truth we can no longer afford to ignore. For 8 years, politicians like Rick Larsen, Pramila Jayapal, Bernie Sanders, Patty Murray, Maria Cantwell, Jason Call, Jill Stein, Tom Hartman, Randy Rhodes, Kashama Sawant, Mary Fossey, Marco Lias, Tracy Carlos, Julio Cortez, June Robinson, Catherine Lewandowski, and Karen Chase have remained silent. Their inaction speaks volumes. The plight of the American worker is dire. It's time for a National Workers' Comp Commission to address these issues. We need leaders who will stand up and fight for the rights and well-being of American workers. Now, you'd think with a system this screwed up, we'd be hearing outrage from the rooftops, right? Politicians, activists, union leaders, media personalities, all those folks who love to talk a big game about social justice and workers' rights. Well, here's the kicker, they're eerily silent. It's like they all got together and decided to start a barbershop quartet dedicated to the sweet, sweet sound of... We're talking about people like Bernie Sanders, who's supposed to be this champion of the working class. Where is he on this? Or how about those progressive darlings in Congress, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar? They're quick to tweet about every other injustice under the sun, but when it comes to injured workers, crickets. And don't even get me started on the unions. They used to be the backbone of the labor movement, fighting tooth and nail for workers' rights. Now, they're more concerned with protecting their own bureaucratic empires than actually helping the people they claim to represent. It's a disgrace, plain and simple. So how the hell did we get here? How did we find ourselves in a world where the progressive movement, once a beacon of hope for the working class, has become so entangled in corporate interests that it can barely recognize its own mission? How did the so-called progressive movement, which once stood firmly for the rights and welfare of workers, become so utterly useless when it comes to protecting workers? How did it lose its way so completely that the very people it was meant to defend are now left vulnerable and voiceless? Well, my friends, it's time for a little history lesson. To understand the present, we must first look back at the past. See, back in the good old days, corporations knew their place. They were allowed to make money, sure, but they weren't allowed to buy politicians or write their own damn laws. They operated within a framework that balanced profit with public good. They were allowed to make money, sure, but they weren't allowed to buy politicians or write their own damn laws. But then something changed. The balance of power began to shift. The lines between business and politics started to blur. What was once a clear boundary became a murky gray area where influence and power could be bought and sold. Lobbyists became more powerful than elected officials. These unelected, unaccountable individuals began to wield enormous influence over the laws and policies that govern our lives. And corporations realized they could make a hell of a lot more money if they could just rig the system in their favor. They saw an opportunity to shape the rules of the game to their advantage, and rig it they did. They manipulated the system to ensure that their interests were always prioritized over those of the public. They poured money into think tanks, creating a network of influence that extended into every corner of policymaking. They funded research that supported their agenda, ensuring that the so-called evidence always backed up their claims. And, most importantly, they bought off politicians from both sides of the aisle. It didn't matter whether you were a Democrat or a Republican. If you were willing to play ball, you were on their payroll. The result? A government that's more interested in serving its corporate overlords than protecting its own people. And the progressive movement? It became a shadow of its former self. They fell for it hook, line, and sinker. They allowed themselves to be co-opted, to be distracted by the shiny objects dangled in front of them by corporate interests. They allowed themselves to be distracted by identity politics and social issues, important as they may be, while ignoring the bread-and-butter economic issues that actually affect working people's lives. They lost sight of the bigger picture. While they were busy fighting over cultural issues, the economic foundation of the working class was being eroded. Jobs were outsourced, wages stagnated, and the gap between the rich and the poor widened. The very people the progressive movement was supposed to protect were left to fend for themselves in an increasingly hostile economic landscape. The labor movement, once a powerful force for change, was weakened. Unions, which had fought so hard for workers' rights, were undermined by laws and policies designed to strip them of their power. Meanwhile, the rich got richer. Corporate executives and their political allies celebrated their victories in lavish fundraisers and exclusive retreats, far removed from the struggles of everyday people. But all is not lost. There is a new generation of activists who are waking up to the reality of corporate greed and political corruption. They are beginning to see through the distractions and are refocusing on the core issues that matter most. Grassroots movements are gaining momentum, and people are coming together to demand real change. They are organizing, educating, and mobilizing to take back the power that has been stolen from them. The fight is far from over, but there is hope. The progressive movement can reclaim its original mission and once again become a force for good. It will take time, effort, and unwavering determination, but together, we can build a future where the interests of the many are prioritized over the greed of the few. So let's not give up. Let's keep pushing forward, united in our quest for justice and equality. The road ahead may be long and challenging, but with perseverance and solidarity, we can create a world that truly works for everyone. Section 4, a system on life support, declining benefits, mounting evidence. Now, you might be thinking, John, this all sounds very dire, but do you have any actual evidence to back up these claims? Oh, honey, do I ever. Remember that Department of Labor report from 2015? The one that exposed the utter failure of state-based workers' comp programs? Yeah, that was a real eye-opener. It showed just how badly injured workers are getting screwed. And guess what? It's only gotten worse since then. Benefits have continued to decline. Workers are facing more denials, more delays, and more red tape than ever before. It's like trying to navigate a labyrinth designed by Kafka after downing a bottle of NyQuil. The evidence is overwhelming. But you know what's even more overwhelming? The deafening silence from those who should be doing something about it. Section 5. Selective advocacy, when some voices are left behind. Now, let's talk about hypocrisy for a second, shall we? It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but it's crucial to understand its implications in the realm of social justice and advocacy. Hypocrisy isn't just about saying one thing and doing another. It's about selectively choosing which battles to fight based on convenience, popularity, or personal gain. Because nothing grinds my gears more than people who claim to fight for justice while conveniently ignoring the plight of those who don't fit neatly into their little boxes. It's easy to rally behind causes that are trending, or that have a broad base of support. But what about the issues that are less glamorous, less talked about, and yet equally important? Take LGBTQ leaders, for example. They've been incredibly vocal about important issues like marriage equality and transgender rights. And good for them. These are critical issues that deserve attention and action. They've made significant strides in bringing these issues to the forefront of public consciousness. Marriage equality, for instance, was a monumental victory that symbolized a broader acceptance and recognition of LGBTQ rights. Transgender rights have also seen progress, with more awareness and legal protections being put in place. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. This is a fundamental principle that should guide all advocacy efforts. But the question remains, why is this principle applied selectively? But where's that same energy when it comes to injured workers? These are individuals who have given their labor, often under harsh and dangerous conditions, only to be left behind when they are no longer able to work due to injury. Where's the outrage when a construction worker gets his back blown out and can't afford his medical bills? These are real people with real struggles, yet their stories rarely make the headlines. The lack of attention and support for injured workers is a glaring example of selective advocacy. Where's the compassion for the single mother who's forced to go on welfare because she can't work after a workplace injury? She's not just a statistic. She's a person with dreams, responsibilities, and a family to support. The system often fails her, and so do many advocacy groups that claim to fight for justice. The truth is, some advocacy groups are more interested in scoring political points than actually making a difference in people's lives. They focus on issues that are likely to garner media attention and public support, often at the expense of those who are most in need. They're happy to champion the causes that get them headlines and donations, but they're less enthusiastic about the less glamorous issues that actually affect the most vulnerable among us. This selective advocacy creates a hierarchy of issues, where some struggles are deemed more worthy of attention than others. Consider the plight of the homeless, the elderly, and those suffering from mental health issues. These are groups that often fall through the cracks of our social safety nets. They don't have the same level of visibility or advocacy as more popular causes, yet their needs are just as urgent, if not more so. It's time for a more inclusive approach to advocacy, one that doesn't pick and choose based on convenience or popularity. True justice means fighting for everyone, especially those who are most marginalized and overlooked. We need to broaden our scope and ensure that no one is left behind. Let's challenge ourselves and our advocacy groups to do better. Let's hold them accountable and demand that they address all forms of injustice, not just the ones that are easy or popular. Only then can we create a truly just and equitable society.